All right, then let's just jump into item number 3. Tonight we have discussion and hopefully initial task force approval on housing. David Vanel, I believe you have been on point on this.
Yes, I have.
Take it away.
So what I'd like to do tonight, we got a little, I thought a little hung up or sidetracked on the TOD paragraphs, and I was a little puzzled by that because that is a direct quote from the existing comprehensive plan. So I'm not quite sure what the issue was there. What I'd like to do is try to focus on a couple of things. I think you all hopefully all saw the document that Jose sent out. I cleaned up a couple things. I added another paragraph about transit-oriented districts and non-residential development contributing $3 per non-residential square foot, et cetera, et cetera. That is also in the comprehensive plan, but I'd like to make sure that it is emphasized and stays there as a means of raising money. And I kind of would like to focus on two things, one of which is at the end of near the end of the document, focusing on the WDU policy is in the various locations in town, in Reston, especially the WDU policy for the TSAs. And then there's a couple of things that the staff had recommended we talk about with one of which is the transfer or the use of county land for affordable housing construction. So why don't we start with the residential area WDU policies? And I welcome anybody's comments.
David, before you take comments and we'll see whose hands are up. David, have you gotten input, any feedback from staff on any of this as well? I know you've
Yes. Yes, I've had a number of meetings and conversations with staff folks, and they, some of what you see here is based upon their recommendations. I think I might have deviated some in the percentages of the for WDUs in the three areas, but I think we've got, between me and staff, I think we've got agreement on what the percentages are, or should be rather. And they've been very helpful on things like the county's work with public-private partnerships. County is well equipped to do those, although I'm not sure, it's not clear to me that they do public-private partnerships specifically with housing. So that's kind of why that paragraph is in there. And the community land trust, we've had several conversations about, and I will let staff speak for themselves, but I think they've found that to be an interesting, perhaps useful approach to reducing taxpayer costs, county costs for long-term affordable housing.
Okay, yeah,
yeah,
David, thank you.
They've pretty much gone over this with a fine-tooth comb, and
yeah, I think, I just wanted, it was really intended more, I'd heard you'd been having a lot of work, conversations with staff, more of a compliment than anything. So thank you, David, for doing all your homework.
Supervisor, we do have a couple hands up.
I see Tammy and Bill Malin. Tammy, you're on mute.
Could Bill please go first? I would like to hear what
Sure.
he says.
Yeah, absolutely. Bill
Yes.
Malin.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to make sure it was clear when David was talking about the residential areas, he means areas outside of TSA and outside of village centers. So under the current comprehensive plan, the village centers and the TSA have specific rates related to WDUs, and the rest of Reston was treated as the countywide rates. So what he's proposing here is matching up the area outside of the TSAs, outside of the village centers, with the current policy countywide, which is the 224, 2% at 60, 2% at 70, and 4% at 80% AMI. So that's just want to provide that clarification there.
All right, thank you, Bill. Okay, Tammy, go right ahead.
Thank you. David, not to rain on your parade. I am interestingly scheduled to meet with Carrie Wilson of Cornerstones on Wednesday to discuss affordable housing in specific and find out what her thoughts are, because I had met with her previously thinking about affordable housing, and this was before the task force. But there are several questions I have about this chapter. It's not number one, like there's not a priority, but the chapter is written, offers no solutions or thoughts about the ADU deficiency. We have WDUs mentioned, and frankly, I thought that Commissioner Carter had made it clear that this chart 224, 60, 70, 80 AMI was the county policy. That doesn't accrue in Reston. That's the starting point. That's at which any commissioner in a TSA with a TSA in their district can negotiate. And it's the starting point. It's the minimum. It's not what's going to happen. And I think our problem is we laymen have assumed this is what's going to happen. No, Reston always gets more than this. And David and I know that because we sit on the RPZ together, and we know that sometimes the percentages are 15 or 20%. So that's one thing that's not clear in this chapter so far. I think maybe it would be really good for David and the land use committee to meet and go over some of this stuff, because I'm telling you, it's not David's fault. He's not lazy. He's worked his buns off on this, but it is very difficult to capture all of this in one lasso and understand it all. There's technical things like, I think Commissioner Carter mentioned there are no WDUs in residential areas. It's strictly ADUs, and that's not clear. The percentages, as I said, are up for debate. It doesn't talk about the village centers retaining their ADU housing that they already have. We want that specifically mentioned in this plan. These are the multifamily apartment, developments that we have in North Point, for example. We have also the senior housing in both Hunters Woods and Lake Ann. So we want to specifically to mention those to be retained. Let's see. Oh, bonus density. No, we are getting rid of bonus density, folks. We're going to earn density throughout the whole plan. That is one of, I'll be formal, Walter, Supervisor Alcorn's things for this plan is we're going to earn density in Reston from now on. That is one of the backbones of the new comprehensive plan is own density, earned density. So we're not wanting to put earned density in as a specific thing for affordable housing. It may be part of what ends up happening, but we don't want to set it in any specific chapter. And the other thing about citing a certain policy, that can change within the scope before this plan is changed. So I think we got to be careful about that and state we're citing this, but if it changes, we change with it. But what's cited isn't really accurate for Reston unless it has the caveats on it that it is the minimum that will be negotiated. Those are just some of my comments, but I would love, and again, kudos to David for his work on this. That it's a complex thing, but we would love for you to get together with the land use so we can, battle through this and see what you think. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tammy. Can I just follow up? I understand about the saying it should be a minimum, that these numbers, instead of making it sound like a cap. I get that. On ADUs, that's ADUs are generated whenever there is a rezoning and it triggers the ADU ordinance. I don't think we got, so are you saying you're thinking of how the plan should call for that?
Here's the gorilla in the bushes that gets everybody confused. ADU is an umbrella.
Wait, say that again, Tammy.
WDUs and affordable. So when people talk about ADUs, you confuse everybody because we don't know whether you're talking about the WDU, workforce housing, or the ADU for the people with the lower income. Both of those require, under that umbrella, require people to have a job and an income. We have other housing needs for people who have no income or don't have sufficient income. I mean, or sporadic income. So we have a complex program here, and this chapter only talks about that umbrella of ADU, which should be changed to another category. It should be called, probably affording housing policy or something, under which are true ADUs and of lower AMI and the workforce. Is that helpful?
Well, I think we're dealing with several terms of art. I mean, WDU is a program in the comprehensive plan. It's countywide, and then it's tailored to how we do it in Reston. The ADU program is written into the county zoning ordinance, and so that's where I guess I was a little confused because I wasn't sure how ADUs would apply. Now, beyond that, there are other terms of art that maybe should be mentioned in here. There are things like permanent supportive housing. If you're talking about people that don't have any income or maybe are just starting to earn income or intermittently, as you note, Tammy, that there's a range of needs that are out there. So I guess you want to make sure that the range is addressed in the comp plan. Is that right?
Right. And we probably need a very succinct chapter written by John Carter or you defining policy, ordinance, etc., so that it's clear, because it is so complicated. Mere mortals don't understand this.
Yeah, I agree. Housing. This is definitely there's no place where there are more acronyms or terms of art than in housing. That's true.
Tammy and Walter, let me start out by saying,
David, please.
I was not trying to ignore ADUs. My understanding was that the laws governing ADUs really come from Richmond. They don't come from Fairfax Government Center.
That's right.
I'd be happy to put more emphasis. I do mention affordable housing a number of times here without trying to say ADUs. But I'd be happy to put something else in here about that, but it's the rules governing that are out of our control, at least as I understand it. And I also, by setting these residential area, village center area, and TSA area percentages for AMI and the WDU commitment, in no way did I intend for that to be the cap. And in fact, in each case, there's a a bonus density. Now, I understand earned density is something different, and frankly, I haven't heard a complete explanation of earned density during any of these conversations. So we can call it what you want to call it, but if you want density devoted to WDUs for people who are teachers and firemen and whatever that work in the county, work for the county, then we're going to have to look to developers to build those buildings.
Well, I'm not arguing that, David, at all. And I hope to God it's not county employees, firemen, teachers, or that are eligible for WDUs. It should be anybody that's got a job. Is it not? Is that a huge thing I missed?
No,
I
think it is anybody who qualifies under the
Correct.
AMI
Correct.
percentages. Yeah.
Correct.
And I will give credit. I think I've done this before, but I will give a great deal of credit to the county for last year saying we aren't getting applications at 100 and 120% of AMI. Why is this even there?
Well, and to your point, David, why was that ever there?
Exactly.
So that's another discussion for another day, but why was it one ever there? Two, why did we have a panel of developers that got it down from 12% of ridiculous 80 AMI was the only thing viable to this 224 ending at 8%? Why do we not have 12% overall at reasonable AMIs? So that's a total, it's water over the bridge, or water over the dam or under the bridge or whatever it is. But I think, and I totally empathize with not understanding earned density. It is an extremely technical process to try to work out how that will be computed. That's why it has not yet been introduced, because we're trying to work it out. We would love you to meet with us so we can sort of explain the basis of it, and I think you'll get right away what I'm saying here.
Sure, I'm certainly happy to meet with you guys, and we can chat about this some more. Something else you mentioned about no WDUs in residential areas. Why is that? Why wouldn't you want WDUs in?
It's not what we want;
areas?
it's what it is. John Carter maybe could. I think it's in TSAs only.
Can I be help? Does anybody else want to talk before I do?
John, why don't you go ahead and then
Okay.
we've got Mark, Looney, and some others lined up. But go ahead, John.
I think if you go back to the residential areas, scroll down just a little bit. In the residential area, this says for rental, and probably in the residential areas, they'll be mostly for purchase units, I would think. And they mostly are ADUs because of the building type. Anything that's type 1, which is basically 3 stories and lower, are ADUs, and the WDU policy doesn't really apply. So that would be probably almost all of the residential area would only be applicable to the ADU side.
John, if I could interject here, my understanding was that, and I could be wrong about this, but my understanding in talking to staff was that all of the requests for purchase for people in these categories, all the requests for purchase in the past, at least the past year, if not longer, have been ADU, not WDUs. And for some reason, I would think it would be the exact opposite, but for some reason, WDU, people who qualify for WDUs rent, they don't buy. And staff maybe could weigh in on that, but that's my understanding.
I think the count that may be true countywide, but in Reston, we probably don't have any applications even in the residential area. If we do, they're very few, the only one I can think of in the last few years is Tall Oaks. And those were ADUs. And they were for purchase. I guess it was Tall Oaks, the Toll Brothers, what is it? Park and Valley. Those were all ADUs. But I want to be helpful in all this. So it's not just the rental, it's for purchase, and they're in both sections. I think the WDUs have less need in the residential areas. We just don't have that unit type in the residential. I'm going to suggest something that hasn't been tried before that might.
Should we not encourage that?
Well, you can, but what does that mean? That means have taller buildings. You have to change the unit type. It's a unit type issue. It's not a location issue. So if you're 3 stories or less, the WDU policy does not apply. You go to the ADU. You get hit by either the WDU policy or the ADU requirements, depending on the building type, not the location. I think the staff.
And the number of units, John. as
And the
well.
number of units, yes, it has to be 50 units or more. I'm going to suggest something that might be helpful. This has always been mysterious to me. Maybe the staff can help here. It says 8%, and before we start quibbling about the percentages, I understand we can do that. 8% for a 12% bonus, and then you can go up to 20%. But what's the number of WDUs required if you do 20%? What I would suggest, and this would be
That isn't that your sliding scale?
well, it's not written. That's what I'm going to suggest is we create a sliding scale that would start from wherever you want, but let's start it at 8% with a 12% bonus. Okay, 9% would be what? 13? 10% would be 14% bonus. I just suggest we fill out the sliding scale all the way up to 20%. And the 20% comes from the state. The state will not allow you to go above 20%. So I think it'd be pretty easy math if you start at 8% and go up to 20 and figure out.
Sure, I can do that.
That would be very helpful to everybody since this WDU issue is a policy and not a zoning ordinance thing. For those who negotiate, this would be a little more fixed sliding scale. I don't know whether staff would like that, but I think it would be worth trying. And I did try it myself. It is useful. And if you set the sliding scale first, then you can figure out where it applies to the village centers or the residential areas or the TSA or whatever. But the sliding scale might be a good place to start.
And would you want a sliding scale graphic that would cover all areas of Reston? So if we started
Yes.
at 8 and went up to 16 or something like that,
Yes.
or 18, I think, or 20 for that matter, I think the sliding scale the county has now starts at what, 12% or less?
8% WDUs and 12% bonus.
If I can jump
Okay.
in, as part of the WDU update, the countywide update,
Yeah, Bill.
we created the scale exactly as you're talking about, John, where it starts at 8%, and as you go up, if you opt in to do more WDUs, the bonus goes, proportionally increases. So it's already been established. It's in Appendix 1 of the policy plan under housing. I'm on my phone. I can't bring it up right now. I'm not sure if someone else can,
I
but
think it's a great idea. Let's put it in.
it's already been
Jose,
established
this is
and
Graham. I
endorsed
have
by
it
the
pulled up. If
board.
you want, I can share my screen.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got it up too.
That countywide scale has been approved by the board.
All right, thank you, Bill. Well, that comes up.
So
Mark,
one more-
Lenny, go ahead, John.
The other thing is I was going to bring up in the TSA areas. I know we're not quite there yet. Today, there is a sliding scale in the comp plan for that. And I don't know whether you want to keep it, but we should talk about it. And as your density goes up, I think it starts at 1 FAR and goes to 4. There's a sliding scale where the number of WDUs goes up depending on the density. I don't know if you want to keep that or not, but I think it would be good to talk about.
John, do you know, or does staff know if there are any buildings in the TSA that are a 4 FAR? My guess would be no, but I'm not positive.
But there's some at 2 and 3
Oh,
FAR.
I'm sure there are.
So-
Yeah, I know there's a number at 2 and a couple probably at 3.
Yeah.
Is it, I guess my question is it worth keeping the 4 on the off chance, or is it best just to scale that back out of the realization that probably nobody's going to come to us with a 4 FAR proposal?
It's one of these graphs. So, I mean, you could take the 4 off and just go to 3. That would work. It doesn't matter. It's just the notion is it's a sliding scale that goes up with the density. And we should talk about that, whether you want to keep it or not, but that is what the last comp plan is. I'm interested in what's on the screen now, which is.
If I could follow up with Graham and Bill, is it necessary? Is it worth rather my memorializing the scale that you have, or the chart that you have on the screen now, and the sliding scale that John referred to for 1 to 4 FAR? Is it worth my memorializing those graphics in this document, or is it sufficient that they exist elsewhere in the policy plan?
Yeah, David,
This is
a couple of things on that. And what I would recommend, since this is in the adopted housing element policy plan, there's 2 different sliding scales that y'all should just be aware of. One is the existing sliding scale, and we have it for both rental and for sale WDUs across the entire county. So this applies everywhere in the county. You have an existing sliding scale of ratio of the percentage of total WDUs. That's the second to the right, or second column from the right, which is 8%, 8.8, 9.6, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the total number of WDUs that you can expect in a particular development. And then associated with that is a percentage of bonus density units. So 8%, if your total number of WDUs that's provided in a development is 8%, you have the potential to realize a 12% density bonus. That's a countywide thing. David, in your memo, that didn't change. So what you're referencing in the document is this existing ratio of bonus to total number of WDUs. So I wouldn't, for the purposes of just kind of cleanup and ensuring that we have consistency across the county in terms of how this functions, I think that referencing this existing sliding scale is sufficient. And what you have in terms of the 3 different tiers of TSAs, village centers, and then the rest of Reston, which is essentially the exact same as the countywide policy, accomplishes that. So that's the one. I think the other discussion is about the second sliding scale, which is specific to the Reston TSAs. And we can pull up that document so that people can look at that. That's an actual graph of a sliding scale of total FAR that's associated with the development and percentage of WDUs.
That only applies to the TSAs though, right?
Correct. That second sliding scale only in the TSAs.
So how does this match with that?
The TSA sliding scale, starts at a 1 FAR, as you mentioned, and as your FAR increases, your commitment automatically increases. The sliding scale that's on here is if you want to do more WDUs, you get a proportional increase in bonus. That's the countywide policy. So one of them starts, TSA, as Davis proposed, would be 12% WDU commitment will be retained. If you keep the sliding scale, it could continue to increase per, as it does today. With it, if your FAR is a 2, it would no longer be a 12% WDU. I think it goes up to 14.
Something higher, yeah.
Right.
So how does that match up with this sliding scale? The one that we're looking at.
It's
The one that-
similar but different, in the sense that the numbers are slightly different in terms of both the percentage of required units and the bonus density associated with it. But it's a similar concept to what's in the current plan. Sorry, I jumped in.
It sounds possible to
Yeah, I mean,
use something along these lines. I don't know what all the middle numbers are. Available bonus, total number of units, number of WDUs expected. I don't know what all that is.
It's just explanatory. That's all.
It's just taking a hypothetical development with 100 base units and explaining how the
yeah.
calculation works and what you base it on.
I see.
Just to take a step back,
Yeah,
I want to
Mark,
make
go
sure
ahead.
that
We need to
I want to
go.
make sure that we don't conflate different concepts and different issues into one.
Good, Mark.
Take the affordable dwelling unit ordinance for a second. That has its history in the early 1970s, where the county imposed a zoning requirement that whether you were developing by right or whether you sought a rezoning, you had to provide affordable housing units as part of that development. And there was no associated offset in, I'll call it density, or there was no increase in density or other compensation to offset for the loss of value or property rights associated with the subsidies necessary to provide the affordable units. The county got sued. The Supreme Court said the county loses, so the county adopted the affordable dwelling unit ordinance as it exists today. That affordable dwelling unit ordinance applies to both by right development, of which we see very little these days, but it also applies to rezonings, and the rezoning, whether it applies to a rezoning, is driven by the type of construction that is used in the units. And any development that has anything other than steel or concrete as the basic construction materials is subject to the affordable dwelling unit ordinance. Now, the percentage of units that you are expected to provide or required to provide pursuant to the zoning ordinance differs based on the unit type and the construction type. If it's pure townhouses, you're typically seeing 12.5% of the units provided as ADUs with an associated bonus density that goes along with it to offset the subsidies associated with providing the affordable units. If it's a multifamily development with structured parking, it's typically up to 5% of the units are provided as ADUs. The workforce, that requirement is applicable everywhere, all the time, no exceptions whatsoever. It's an ordinance requirement.
Right.
And it doesn't matter by location or otherwise. It's countywide. By contrast, the workforce dwelling unit policy is not an ordinance. It's an adopted policy of the board that says when a rezoning application comes forward, we will consider it on its merits, including whether it is contributing to affordable housing as a general concept in the county. And the board has over time developed criteria for how to evaluate whether an application is contributing to housing affordability in the county based on this sliding scale of units and income levels. No question, the prior WDU policies that had the income levels for eligibility for a workforce housing unit set at 80, 100, and 120 of AMI overshot the market. And so earlier this year, the board revised the countywide policy for workforce housing to lower the AMIs, but correspondingly lowered the percentage of units that developments were required to provide at those lower AMI levels. So instead of more units at higher income levels, we did fewer units at lower income levels because it actually targeted the people who needed the help as opposed to those who didn't need the help. The sliding scales that you've seen from staff that are in the policy are reflective of, I'll call it the sweet spot between the number of units to be provided at the correct income levels versus the offsets that are required in the permitted densities to make them no longer subsidized, but in effect pay for themselves through increases in density, so that the policy becomes constitutionally defensible. Because if it's just a taking of private property rights through subsidies for affordable housing, it's unconstitutional. And you're going to be subject to challenge as a result of that. And so the countywide policy that Graham has up on the screen now, applying to rental, is the starting point on a countywide basis. There are multiple sub areas within the county that have a slightly different table than this. What David is talking about is the starting point for the number of units or the percentage of units to be subsidized is going to start, rather than 8%, at 12%. And instead of 12% being the bonus density for providing 12% workforce housing, it's going to be a higher number to make the program constitutionally defensible. Part of the reason for adopting this revised table earlier this year was to try to eliminate the case-by-case negotiations that had been occurring when the income levels were too high, so that not enough people qualified for the subsidies, or said another way, we weren't providing sufficient subsidies. And so the hope, at least as I understood it from the countywide level, was to eliminate the negotiations by lowering the AMI levels and lowering the overall percentage of units to be provided, so that you weren't having to negotiate it on a case-by-case basis. I think the question in my mind is, what's the sliding scale for this table and the for sale table if the starting point is 12% WDUs versus the 8% WDUs that are on this chart here? And how does that play out in terms of the total number of units to be provided as WDUs and the total percentage of bonus density to pay for the subsidies associated with those WDUs? That's the piece that I think, at least as I understand it, either is missing or isn't complete here. And I think, as John was talking about, the current plan for WDUs in terms of the percentage to be provided in the Reston TSAs is on a sliding scale based on the FAR of the development. And so if we're going to go back to that model, as opposed to this model where we're pegging the percentage of WDUs based on the FAR of an individual application, then that chart needs to be updated in similar fashion to what we have here.
Mark, thank you for teeing that up. And David, I know you've been on point and you've been working this. What are your thoughts on that? Is that something you've discussed?
I think you're on mute, David.
David?
Sorry.
You scared me by
my
not saying anything.
My goal in this is I want to try to maximize the flexibility of the county to offer a higher number of affordable or workforce dwelling units, consistent with what the statute is, or consistent with what we may be able to change in the policy for WDUs. And I know this table looks familiar because the staff and I, they presented this to me, and because my first go at the 60, 70, and 80% of AMI percentages was higher than what's on this chart. And this chart's based upon actual research, not just my wishes. So I think we ought to have, again, I think we ought to encourage ADUs and WDUs in the residential areas. We ought to have a higher percentage of those two types of housing in the village centers. I'm certainly, Tammy mentioned the Lake Ann and North Point, and I didn't mean to exclude them or shut them down or anything like that. We can put that in, specifically if you want. We can mention those two two programs. And then in the TSAs, I think, like everybody would assume, I would assume, thinks that the most density ought to be down near the rail stations. And so I'm just looking for the right mix of percentages and encouragement to develop, or encouragement for developers to build what we need in those three areas.
Could I add one more thing?
Please, John.
I think Mark is right on point largely. And I certainly appreciate David. This is really complicated and has been subject to a lot of debate. The one thing we might try in Reston, and this will make a lot of difficulty. It's one thing to say Fairfax County has a certain policy. It's one thing because the difference between, say, a Reston and the rest of the county, or Tyson's and the rest of the county, is you can make a clear distinction and why there should be different requirements, I guess, for those. The trouble with Reston is we've got everything here in Reston. We've got a lot of things in close proximity. So I would suggest that we try, I don't know if it'll work, but try to have one standard that would go across all the areas. An example of this would be the TSAs. We have things that are from 1 to at least 3 FAR. We also have a few that are much lower than 1 FAR, and it's confusing what the requirement would be on that, since it's in theory starts at 1. So I guess you would use the residential area for the area in the TSAs that's less than 1, and you'd use the TSA one. I would see if we could merge that together and create one sliding scale that would go across all of the densities from 0 units, almost from 0.1 units per acre to the upper level, and just see how we are aligned, because these areas are in close proximity. The neighborhoods run right up against the TSAs. The low density areas in the TSAs run right up against the high density. And so I would give that a try with this sliding scale. Whether we should be negotiating or not negotiating, that what's been set up in the county now is a base level, which is 8% with a 12% bonus. But then they go on and say you can have a 20% bonus. But this chart that was there sets out that sliding scale, and that chart must have been created for some reason that you were supposed to negotiate that. And I think you are supposed to negotiate. In Reston, at least for the last almost 4 years, we did not follow the county policy. We did not follow the 80, 100, and 120 AMIs. We did not. For most of them, and it's been somewhat inconsistent because there's different developers with different wherewithal. We have been at 70, 80, and 90, or 78 and 100. So we've negotiated that down quite a bit. And I would prefer not to have developers to come back and renegotiate those terms because we set up a program that makes it enticing to do that. So again, what I would suggest is to go back and try a sliding scale that would fit all of Reston from 0.1 units per acre up to 3 FAR. See if we could come up with something would go across, would apply to rental as well as for sale units, and that would not encourage people to renegotiate. So that's, I know that's extra work, but I think we should try it given the proximity of all the things that we have here in Reston. So
Okay, thank you, John. Thank you very much. We do have some other hands up. Yes, and I see a hand I've never seen, Barbara Byron. All right, I'm gonna let you cut line, but go ahead, Barbara.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it. So this is obviously a very complicated subject, and I certainly appreciate that, even for those of us who work with it. I do agree with Commissioner Carter that simpler is absolutely better. But what I would suggest, perhaps, David, and I don't know if you did it, is to look at Tyson's, because we actually have a different program in Tyson's, not only for the WDUs, but also for the for sale condos. And since Reston, particularly the TSA, is getting a lot of condos, I think a good place for you to start considering what Commissioner Carter was just talking about would be to take a look at what we're doing in Tyson's and to see if there's something there that you could that resonates for Reston with you. And the other point I wanted to make is I don't, just because we today don't have 4FAR doesn't mean we won't have it in the future. So I would not necessarily suggest giving an upper limit to this. I don't, it feels a little short-sighted to me. But in any case, I don't know if you did look at Tyson's, but I think it's worthwhile looking at it as a model, a potential model from which you could either adopt or modify.
Thank you, Barbara. In fact, I did look at Tyson's in the early stages of this, and that's kind of where I came up with the idea of it's not a unique idea, but the fact that Reston probably needs and deserves more than
Yeah.
the countywide, and also that it made sense to me that we maybe the sliding scale idea will work here. A single sliding scale idea would work here for these three distinct areas of Reston. But I sort of came up with the idea of three distinct areas because we've got three ready-made locations, if you will, three ready-made areas that probably can effectively absorb different levels of affordable housing.
Mhm.
And with the TSA being the biggest one, and since the village centers are structured in the way they are, it seems to me that that's the next logical step down. So but yes, thank you
Yeah.
for that. I did look at that, and I'll go back and look at it again. I know that Tyson's does have some different approaches than
Yeah.
countywide. So
And I think it's particularly important perhaps to look at what we did with condos. There's a certain person who may be chairing your committee who had a big hand in that. And it came from a lot of discussion and experience on how to deal with condos. And I haven't heard any discussion about that tonight. So you might also take a look at that policy.
Yeah,
what does the policy about condos say?
Oh, it's so
Barbara?
complicated.
it is
Oh.
complicated.
Can you do the 25-cent version?
Yeah,
Yeah, do you want to do it, Walter? Walter's
yeah,
basically the author of it.
yeah. It basically it has a lower requirement in terms of providing for sale WDU condos in Tyson's, but it's very narrow and limited to that. And basically what happened was somebody who comes into the market and they want to build $1 million condos, for example, the formula didn't really work for sale unit condos at the high end of the market. And so for a number of reasons. So it provides sort of a relief out. For rentals, it's worked fine. It's worked fine, I think, in Tyson's, it's worked fine in Reston. But there was one case in particular in Tyson's that basically was stuck for 2 years just on the WDU commitment question. And so that's why I got dragged into that one a few years ago.
Okay, thank you.
So we got 4 hands up. 3 of you have been extremely patient. Gary and then Mark, then we'll go to Bill and Jan.
Well, I had my hand up, I thought, before Tammy, and I was just going to say that this was extremely complicated till I listened to this conversation, and I would now say it's extraordinarily complicated. And to Tammy's point, originally, because we've had to discuss this in land use, I think, David, and you get all the kudos for going through all this almost by yourself. if we could go through that and talk to you in with the land use group, that would be very helpful. And bringing up the complications here by everybody talking about it, and I didn't get a chance to say it at first. I think getting this right is going to be, very important for Reston, and may even go beyond Reston, because if we do this right, it will help others across the county. So, David, kudos, and we probably need to go through this some more to get it right, given all this conversation that we've had tonight.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gary. Appreciate that. And I would just, my only request would be, if it does go to P&Z for further discussion, just make sure you got somebody from county staff that can help clarify anything that needs to be clarified, because this is, as you say, Gary, extraordinarily complicated.
Yeah, and I was not thinking of P&Z. I was thinking of our land use group. That's
The land use group, right? Sorry.
chapter.
Yeah, the land use group.
But your point is well taken. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Mark, Malcolm, and then Bill Penniman and Jan.
Thank you for that last comment. It's where I start from. What I see with the housing discussion, there is a disconnect in my mind with the land use when we talk about FAR, and particularly with where David Bunnell started with a difference in TSA versus TOD. TOD, I'm very sensitive to one of those TSAs called Herndon. And its TOD, as you are well aware, is the Board of Supervisor property. It's 1.23 million square feet. When you put that to, it was, as we worked with Commissioner Carter, the TOD density is 1.5 to 2.5 in that. If you increase with this discussion that we've had, it would push it up to 3. When you start at 2.5, that's a little over 3 million square feet. The current comprehensive plan actually had excessive amount at 4.2 million square feet between office and residential.
That's right.
We had that discussion, Supervisor Alcorn, you and I, in March of 20. The issue that comes in is at roughly 3 million square feet, and the potential of a corporate headquarters as in the current, and also workforce dwelling units or affordable dwelling units, you're still talking about at 3 million square feet, given the land area that remains in the Board of Supervisor property, 15 to 16 story buildings. If you do the 20% bonus, you're pushing it all the way up to 4.75 million square feet. Excuse me, I'm looking at numbers of the impact of the statements, and that's what I'm trying to come through. So the bottom line is, one, excellent work that David's done with this, but the impact of land use and its statements have to be carefully considered, particularly with the TOD area of the Herndon TSA in thinking about the impact. Commissioner Carter and I worked to get a particular statement that the aesthetic impact to the nearby residential area called Polo Fields would be considered to limit the height of those buildings. On the opposite side, in the town of Herndon, they've already made a decision in their planning that basically heights don't exceed about 16 stories. And through that particular section, it's 12 and 15 story to look at that. When you look at the sight line of the townhouses that are now being built, basically 4-story height, it gives you an idea at the distance that the height of those buildings is pretty much limited to not have a visual impact and only about 12, maximum 14 stories. So we have a gauge in how we work this in the future. I'm just giving, this is the reality of the statements versus what we're trying to do. Thank you very much for listening.
Mark, thank you. Appreciate you pointing out and reminding us about the application to the Herndon TSA. Thank you.
Walter, could I make a comment to Mark,
Yeah,
please?
please, David.
Mark, I mean, since we are trying to create an approach specific to Reston's TSAs, the two Reston TSAs, why can't we come up with something different for the Herndon TSA?
Actually, within
Now,
the comprehensive plan, the Herndon TSA is a Reston TSA. All
yeah, that's
three
true.
are,
That's
we have to work at them together. Part of my reason was, one, to keep our consideration of the whole of the Reston comprehensive plan in place, not
Right.
just focus on the core. I live in Reston,
Right.
but am very sensitive to that area. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, and thank you, David. I think even though the Herndon TSA is in the Reston TSA, David, I think you may be onto something in terms of, there might be some specific considerations for the Herndon TSA when it comes to density bonuses, in large part, frankly, because it is owned by the Board of Supervisors. And so, it's typically this whole, I mean, basically everything that we're talking about here with WUs assumes there's a developer, private property, and coming in and, is looking to build and, this is a little different situation with the Herndon TSA, so.
well, in practical terms, I would think that even that there will be differences in approach between Reston Wheelie and Reston Town Center
Yes,
in terms of what's developed there and how many WDUs, ADUs we can squeeze in there. And so, maybe Herndon qualifies in a different way.
yeah, there may be a different way to frame it, I'm not sure, but that's probably worth a discussion. So, thank you both. Bill and then Jan.
I'll limit my comments at this point, but I want to allude to some of the things Tammy said and perhaps Gary as well. The idea of eliminating bonuses is a sure way to assure that you don't get the development we need, and you won't get the workforce housing, the ADUs. ADUs, maybe that's by statute, but if you shrink the total, then the percentage means you also shrink the potential workforce housing. You need development to make that work. You need development to get people of various incomes close to the subway, which is the whole reason the county, the state, and the federal government and we taxpayers invested in it. So I'll talk about it more when we get to land use, but the land use group seems to be headed towards eliminating bonuses and squashing the potential development through a earn density and eliminating a minimum size, which means we could end up with a bunch of townhouses and a complete waste of the TSAs. In any event, I support David's bonus approach and leave it at that for now. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Bill. Jan, and then we'll, I think, move on. Jan, go ahead if
You're muted. Yeah.
All right. So thanks,
there you
David.
are.
Thanks, Mark, for your words. Good food for thought. I hate to bring this up, but has anybody ever thought about putting caps on the buildings, the money, the size of the dwelling, the number of units that is built in Reston? Has anybody thought about a cap that we could have so that we can cut it off if it just seems too unwieldy, if we can't keep the infrastructure going enough to support all of the extra population, then we might think of a cap to make sure that we continue to have a good flow in Reston. And I think that what Bill said about You know, Tyson's may have some good ideas. I think they are. But Tyson's, I think we should grab the Tyson ideas that apply to Reston and possibly use them. I think that Reston and Herndon should be developed along the same manner because we're so close. We have the metro. And those are my points. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Jan. I appreciate those points. I just point out there was a type of cap put into the comprehensive plan in Tyson's. Actually, it was called the intermediate development level, the IDL, and some staff members are probably laughing right now. It had the, I wouldn't say perverse effect, but it had the unintended effect of causing landowners to rush in and rezone. In effect, to lock in their density in order to get it basically before the cap. Now, the IDL was gotten to, and then at that point, the Board of Supervisors realized they were only a few years into Tyson's infrastructure development. So it was kind of, there was no, I mean, frankly, legally, it would have been very shaky to stop rezonings and to, in effect, cap it at that point. So rezonings kept coming afterwards. But I think, Jan, what one of the things you're alluding to as well is the need to make sure there is, if not a cap, at least a planned target of population of households that is acceptable. You know, that makes sense. And certainly the concept, and I realize there may be a little disconnect between the earned density concept and the bonus density for housing concept, but I think the earned density concept overall, I think is another way to come at the total number of units that ultimately could be expected in Reston. So anyway, it's a long answer, but to a loaded question, Jan. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Anyone else before we move on? And David, I guess there's been a lot said. Are you comfortable at this point moving this to additional discussion?
Certainly I am. You know, there's certainly not going to be a vote tonight.
I don't think so.
If I could make just, I know you've got to move on, but make one comment about what Jan and some others have said, and then I'd ask the group to offer some comments by email to the last 2 points, to the public-private partnership thing and to the community land trust proposal or suggestion. So, but my comment about the growth, my comment about controlling the growth is as kind of as follows. A long time ago, we were given a lot of material, and one of those pieces of material was this enormous spreadsheet, and it talked about all kinds of different things that were going to happen. It's probably more like a Microsoft project sheet than a spreadsheet, but all kinds of things that were going to be developed. The overpasses and the tunnel to nowhere or whatever. And if you look carefully at that chart, this stuff isn't happening tomorrow. You know, I don't think that there's a good bit of infrastructure planning and there's an enormous amount of infrastructure planning contained in that document, and stuff that is 10, 15 years out. I mean, we've started looking at what, a 30-year timeline. And so a lot of what people are fearful of isn't going to come soon. And so, you know, I'm all for, you know, measured growth. And I'm not sure that cap makes a whole lot of sense, but finding that sweet spot is, I think, where most people want to go. I certainly don't want to live in a Reston that looked like it did 25 years ago or 35 years ago. It's not that, and it's never going to be that. But I think we have less to fear about population growth than some people portray. So
Okay,
anyway,
thank you, David.
I would love to hear comments about suggestions about by email, please, about the public-private partnerships and how we might flesh that out a little bit to encourage the county to shift focus toward housing, and also what the sensibility is about community land trusts. Because I think both of those concepts belong here. I'm not smart enough to figure out how to say it right to make it sell.
All right. Okay, thank you, David. Appreciate that. Let's move on. It's 9 minutes after 8. We've actually got a good amount of land use chapter discussion to do. I see Lynn is on. Lynn, welcome. And
thank you. It's good to be here. I have to warn you, my internet connection is not very stable, but we're going to get through this.
all right, Lynn, thank you. But Lynn, before you get going with your updated chapter, I know at a previous task force meeting, there was a request for basically a red line or a crosswalk of the existing comprehensive plan text and what is in the land use chapter. And I think that scared everybody because the amount of work that it was going to take to do that. Well, there's one person that stepped up and did it. Jose, can you just spend a few minutes walking?
Bravo.
Yes,
Sure,
you.
let's hit yeah, I can hit the highlights, and I'll try. I know that I anticipate 20 minutes of questions, but I can knock this out in 8 minutes. And then
And Jose, before you do that, let me just make sure everybody understands, for version control purposes, this is the previous version of the land use chapter, okay? So basically, Jose, I guess last week, finished a review. So this was not distributed to everybody, but Jose, give us the highlights in terms of what you found, the differences between what's in the current comprehensive plan and what is in the just previous land use draft land use chapter.
yeah, so this markup was from the October 9th land use draft that was sent out. So what I'm doing right now is I'm sharing, hopefully everyone can see to Word and they can see the current comprehensive plan. What I kind of did was through comments, put where this text exists in the current comprehensive plan, whether I think it's 2014, 2015, and where the markup of it is on this document. So for to be quick, I'm starting at planning history because before that is the planning principles, and Tammy reminded me that that's its own chapter, and before that is the one Reston introduction. So I'm going to start planning history because that's in the current text. So you could find it on page 94 and 95, which is right here and starts here. So I basically hyperlinked this whole document to kind of link you there, so you could just easily go to that page, and I hyperlink back so I don't get lost and go back to where it is on land use draft. So as you can see, markup is in blue of what was you know uh, changed in the current version and the other. So as I'm going through the draft, you can see where maybe things I was unable to locate. It's not saying that it's not in the land use draft, but some specifics that you couldn't find. So I couldn't find the area wide recommendations that are in the plan. So just to go back, so it's all hyperlinked, and looked at it this morning. They work. So again, going down the document, I kind of explained some method to my madness. So I'm saying It's derived from the land use designations on page 18. So you can just go to page 18, land use designations. It's this subheading is retitled in parentheses, I mean in quotations, one Reston, and it says the Reston land use map assigns blah blah blah. And again, where you can find up the markup of this on this document. And you can see that here. So and even when in my note, I say it's found in the one Reston section of this land use draft. And again, this is the land use draft dated October 9th. So just what I'll do is I'll hit the highlights. And I know that Lynn and John Carter presented these charts and tables. I kind of said that it's found on pages 19 to 21, and this chart replaces the text that is found on page 70 and 72 of this document. So you could see that chart, what the changes are there. So I guess with, in essence of time, some of the things that I've noted, and I've written them down, on page 108 of the current comprehensive plan, there's a subheading called TOD district intensity, and I couldn't find it in this version. So go. So
Yeah, I think just to add to that observation, Jose, you will notice that there are mentions of intensities within. So our goal was to really try and condense.
Oh yes, I know.
The land use so that it was more organized and easier for the reader to follow.
Oh no, thank you, Lynn. Yeah, and
job. And you are the somebody made a comment that you're the man, and I ditto that remark.
No, thank you, Lynn. So just to, like I said, just to highlight, it's linked, and then there were some things that I couldn't locate, and like you said, Lynn, it may have been to condense, but one of the ones that did strike out to me, there is, and it's probably not doesn't need to be included in the land use draft, was there's like an implementation section, interim conditions, but and again, maybe this one doesn't matter, but in the other commercial areas, there's the Bowman office, but there's also Laurel Way, which is outside of the PRC, but is included in the land use document. It's very small, but I did note it. And again, yeah, Laurel Way, I didn't see it in the draft, but Supervisor, I think that's as quick as I could go to let Lynn have some discussion on land use.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Jose. I guess at this point, I do want to be careful with version control, but perhaps if anybody wants a copy of what Jose did, just ask him. I think that's probably the Jose, what do you think? Just to try to, because I don't want to send out another version of it's been overtaken by events.
Yeah, some of it has been overtaken by events. I know Lynn has worked with some of the task force members on comments, so I'm
So
happy
Jose,
to
why don't
share.
we do that? So anybody who wants a copy of what you did, and I saw Jan raised her hand. Send it there, and I think it is very important. And maybe this is Jose. I'm not going to say this exercise needs to be done multiple times, but I think it's important. Let's make sure that we all have our eyes open in terms of changes to the existing comprehensive plan, in what is being proposed here, both in terms of any new language, but also in terms of anything that's left out. So, because and this is one of those things. There are a lot of moving parts to this, and there are a lot of pieces. So I think the more eyeballs we have on it, the better. And then as people see differences that they think need discussion, then I would encourage people to bring that up. And it may just be that it's somewhere else, or maybe it's just phrased differently. But thank you, Jose, for getting us going on this route.
Yeah, I'm happy once the task force kind of gives initial approval to go back one more time. And again, I went line by line, and 95% I think it's there, but I know there's a 5% that maybe I messed up on.
Jose and Walter, this is David Donnell. If I could make a suggestion about
Please.
controlling the versions, I think, Jose, you could post this rather than sending it out. You could post this on the website and make it read only. Do not allow anybody to edit it. And you can download it or read it and make some edits in a separate document and forward it on. But you don't, Walter's exactly correct. You don't want people hosing up your work.
Yeah, are other task force members okay with that? David, that may be a way to manage the version control. Suggestion. Yeah, upload, Michelle says upload as a PDF. Ooh, there we go. Jose, do you
It's
think
already
that might be
packaged as a
possible?
PDF too. Yeah, I already did it, so I can just get it.
Okay. All right. Thank you all. Appreciate that. And again, I think as a reference document that should be very helpful to folks that do want to be able to crosswalk at least an earlier version of the land use chapter and the existing comp plan. Okay, great. All right, Jose, thank you very much for doing that. Lynn, take it away from here.
Thank you so much. Jose, I'm going to ask, so what I've done, and Bill Penniman knows that I was having issues with Microsoft Word continually not responding. So I did exactly what was recommended, and I saved the red line version as a PDF. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be sharing my screen, and we are going to go through the red line version. So you will be able to see all of the edits that we had that were coming in over the last week and a half. We have edits from, of course, Bill Penniman, Bruce Ramo, John Mooney, Moira Callahan, and Chris Daniel as well. So I want to thank everyone for taking the time to go through this document. I know it's huge, and as you said, the more eyes on this, the better. But I can assure everyone who provided comments and who was anticipating providing comments that nothing that is recommended gets implemented without a real rigorous discussion by the working group members. We also, John Carter and I also met with staff and Nova regarding the Reston Town Center North area. And while the attorneys for Inova recommended that we take revised text from the county staff, again, the working group discussed that very rigorously, and we came to the conclusion that the new text that we have provided is what we strongly feel should be in the land use chapter. So we are going to ask staff to take our version and make edits from there when it goes to staff. And that I believe is the proper protocol for that. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And we are going to be looking at the Adobe Acrobat Redline. And thank you, Jose, for giving me permission. Oh, that's the wrong one. Sorry. That's the old one. We want the new one. Okay, this is what we want. Okay. And I'm trusting that everyone can see this. Let me get rid of this.
Can you make it a
Okay.
little bigger?
I'm sorry?
Can you make it a little bigger?
This is about as big as I can go.
Okay, very good.
I'm at 153%.
Okay.
So if you could maximize your window, that may help, Jan.
Okay, good idea.
There should be
Okay.
a bar on the left of your screen. You can do it yourself. Little magnifying thing.
Left of my screen.
Okay.
Okay.
Left middle.
Yeah, and if you go to
Okay,
view,
so-
if you look to
yeah.
fit to width, Jan, it'll broaden it out over the whole screen.
Okay.
Sorry, Lynn, go ahead.
Oh, of course. The introduction, very minimal edits. Where we received edits from folks, I've tried to make a note in the right navigation pane, who made the edit and what the task force discussion and outcome was for that section. So we didn't have a whole lot of change. The planning principles have been deleted since that is its own chapter. So that's cut out a couple of pages. I do want to
may I
say,
point out one
yes,
thing?
yes,
Paragraphs 1 and 2 in the introduction are repeated in a slightly different way in paragraphs 3 and 4. If you take a look at it, it's kind of two different versions of the same thing. So we need not go over it tonight, but
okay, thank you, John. Appreciate
and I
that.
remember when we wrote it twice, and
Oh.
both versions ended up in the introduction.
Thank you.
Good catch,
Appreciate
John.
that. Yes. So we all saw the Reston land use categories. This just imported directly from the current plan. I do want to acknowledge the great edits that we received from Moira Callahan. And we do have, and Bill Malin can testify to this, that I just can't get my head around the old land use categories that we used previously that were based on persons per gross acre, and then trying to translate that into dwelling units. So there is a bit of a disconnect between the zoning and land use. And I'm hoping that this is an opportunity for us to maybe work with staff to figure out how do we get these closer together. Because it's really, it really is apples to oranges to many of us. And Moira and I are going to be having a conversation about this when we have an opportunity to get together. So this is where, so what we've done is we've gone through this many times before, but we just have indications of where we want to insert the maps within, and this will be a directive for staff to work with us on this. So I'm just going to scroll through so many of this. So this was a recommended addition by Mr. Penniman, and the group felt that the discussion of structured parking was needed, and we felt that the statement of at least half of structured parking should be below ground. We had a lot of discussion regarding the applicability of that to properties such as the library. So we changed that wording to say structured parking may be below ground where feasible, and that above grade, so wrap above grade structured parking with active uses to the maximum extent possible. We thought that was comprehensive plan language that was applicable.
Hey, Lynn, this is Mark. Can I ask a quick question on that? So is it your view that that language would preclude all new freestanding parking structures, no matter the location. In other words, if you had a parking structure that was freestanding, it wouldn't be allowed anymore.
I think I'm going to defer that question to Commissioner Carter.
No. In a word, no, you could do them above grade.
That's correct. To me too.
It's
I-
where
food
fees-
for
Thank you.
thought.
Thank you, John.
Yeah.
We're-
Food for thought. It might be good to clarify that, just
That's possible.
because it's not clear from what I read that that's true.
Good,
Okay.
thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Let me see if I can just make a quick, let me see if I can just highlight this in PDF. No. All right. Okay, we had, this was from Chris Daniel. So preserve, we had originally used historical resources, and Chris aptly pointed out that the correct term is heritage resources.
Thanks,
So
Lynn.
we made that. Yep. And then also the Reston land use calculations, of course. This is an exercise that is still in process. We did have an opportunity to, again, meet with staff and get some clarifications on the numbers. Now, one of the recommendations that came in was that instead of putting maximum remaining dwelling units, that we entertain, instead of using maximum, to do estimated. And this was from Mr. Penniman, and he stated with the concept of earned density. Oh, this was the working group's comment back to Bill Penniman regarding the decision to reject that suggestion. And that was with the concept of earned density. We really would not be able to calculate estimates. So the maximum remaining and potential will be real numbers once the calculations are completed.
Now, if I could add something, Lynn, to this. These are this is what the land use would actually produce. These are not projections of this is what the land use would actually produce. This is one area where we should work together with the affordable housing unit. So if you provide a bonus on top of the bonus, if you will, in the WDUs, you need to reflect how much of a bonus would you estimate would be. So you need to increase the numbers if you go with the bonus. Now, why are these numbers important? These are the numbers that you use to calculate the number of schools, the impact on the transportation system, and the number and type of parks. So these numbers are reasonably important. And that's why in this plan, these are a calculation of what the land use will produce, not a projection.
Thank you, John.
John, one quick question on that topic. There was conversation earlier about the interim development levels in Tyson's. Is this a similar concept here that we're now importing here, where there's sort of I'll call it an interim checkpoint or cap until it's reached? Or how does this work in comparison to what was described earlier?
No, this is not an interim. This is actually what the land use plan as written, however we end up writing it, these numbers should reflect the land use numbers.
But John, these are output numbers, not
right.
calculation.
Yeah. So, and they're important because of these calculations we use them for. And that's why to be careful to try to get as much accuracy as we can. We know there's inaccuracies, but get as accurate as you can. Otherwise, you're going to be out of sync in the schools or the roads or the parks. This is hard on people because we don't often do it this way, but I think it's the best way. And it's not an interim number. This is the so-called, the production of all the land use as it's going to be written in this comp plan. What can I go? Oh, so Mark, you asked, I think the last time about the base. In some cases, there was a base zone and a final zone. That's why we've eliminated the base zone in the different areas. I just want to make that clear in case you want to bring it back, which we could, but the base is not as important if these are, in theory, the numbers that are produced by the land use as recommended.
I guess what
that's
I'm,
clear.
yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm, the question I'm asking is, and just take it as an example, right? If there are 2,600 dwelling units left in the village centers,
Yeah.
are those dwelling units allocated parcel by parcel, or are they allocated on a first come, first served basis within each of the village centers? And how do you decide which village center gets what apportionment of the 2,600, or is it a projection of what might be achieved, but not necessarily a firm cap? Because I think that's the real question. Is, I think what set aside the use of the term interim for a second, what we saw it happen in Tyson's 10 years ago was it was treated as, you better run to the courthouse and grab your portion or you're going to get shut out. And I guess the question is that the incentive that we're trying to establish here, or is this a target that we then reevaluate every so often based on what we're seeing on the ground and coming through the process?
Okay, that's thank you, Mark, because this is an excellent case for that. The 2,600, and actually it's the 3,185 in the last column. That's based on the 13 to 20 units per acre using the high end. So if you multiply the acreage in all the village centers times 20, you're going to get 3,185. So that's how that's calculated. So that the land use plan is recommending a range from 13 to 20. And what we did is multiply the acreage times 20. And so that would be the number of units that could possibly be produced. And that's what we did in each one of these. Convenience centers was simple, but other commercial areas, but the PRC area is the same. Harder to do in the PRC areas.
Right. So are we then, I mean, just to then put a finer point, and I'm sorry to belabor this, but
it's okay, Mark. I think this is important.
The 10,000 then in the TSAs that's essentially unzoned at the moment. If I understand the left-hand column, that's effectively what's on the ground plus what's got zoning approval. If there's 10,000 left over across the 3 TSA areas, are we apportioning who gets what share of the 10,000, or is it an aggregate number? And what happens if in 5 years, we've got 7 applications across 3 TSAs that have 10,112 units proposed as opposed to 10,000? Does the person coming in with the final 112 lose those 112 because they didn't get there first?
No, now you've picked the weakest number in the chart, which is the 10,000. We need to work on that some more. But what that is if you calculate all the densities that are proposed in the land use plan for all the properties, that's what's left.
Okay.
So it's not a cap. It allows each property to go to the maximum basically on all of the parcels, which we know that won't occur, but it's from the land use that these numbers are calculated.
Yeah, let me just jump in, John, because Mark, this is a really important piece. My understanding, I think, let's take village centers and let's look at that. So that 3,185 number is basically the maximum should, as John described, should maximum residential under the existing zoning range be used. So if somehow that were changed, and if the next time the plan gets reviewed, let's just say for whatever reason North Point is not in the picture anymore for additional residential, for whatever reason, that number would change from 3,185 to some number below that,
Yeah.
2,000, 2,200, whatever. But it's reflective of what's in the plan,
Yes.
not a planning number.
Right, it's not a projection, it's in theory a calculated number.
John,
Okay.
just really, this is Moira, just really quickly, you just mentioned to Mark the 10,000 and the 31, and you told him how you got that figure. Is that written somewhere in there, or can we add it if it's not in there, that how that was calculated? I just don't see it on my screen.
It's not written, so I guess we could write it. I wanted to, I think we ought to have an introduction to this table that explains perhaps a little bit better what it is. So Maura, I think your suggestion is a good one. Other people have suggested that as well.
I mean, if I looked at that, I would have no idea where you got that number from.
Yeah, the numbers are bouncing around a little bit depending on if the density is changing or if we're adding bonus units, that the numbers will start bouncing around. But I think that's a good suggestion, is to have at least a paragraph explaining how these are created.
And we do have a note pertaining to that in the Reston land use calculations, that an introduction to this section is in process.
Yeah, I think Gary.
If you can see this.
Gary Maupin suggested that. I think that it explained this better for people. We don't often do this in Fairfax to calculate this way. And remember, this is for all of Reston, not just the TSAs. It's for all of Reston. It's not really that difficult to calculate. If you know what the density is supposed to be on every parcel, then you should be okay. The weakness again is in that TSA, the leftover. That's hard to calculate given where we are in the process. And the neighborhoods is little difficult to calculate because you don't know how much density there's going to be in the single family detached neighborhoods. But the
John,
convenience centers, commercial areas, those are pretty easy to calculate.
For what it's worth, I think the current comprehensive plan, and maybe staff can correct me if I misremember this, but I think the current comprehensive plan was somewhat based on a similar construct in that there was a projected number of residential units that would be zoned in each of the transit station areas. And in turn, there was I'll call it a percentage that we assumed would never get built, either for market reasons or otherwise. And so for purposes of calculating the infrastructure needed to support the development, it was based on a factor of 80% or 85% of the total zoned number of units, because 15 or 20% of the zoned units would never actually get built. And so it would be the same way of not providing parking at Tyson's Corner Center based on Christmas Eve demand, but rather on demand throughout the majority of the year. And so I think that's the question that I'm really asking is the 10,000 indicative of the Christmas Eve planning, or is it indicative of sort of the year-round planning? And perhaps an explanation of sort of how that number is derived and how it applies station by station will help sort that out.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Mark. And you see in the note that there was an attempt to get to that, the 80%. In the old comp plan, there were targets for each transit station area. Now, if you added those targets up, it was too low in the last plan. So then there was a higher number, a substantially higher number that was used. I never could figure out how the two work together. That's one of the reasons why I think this is simpler. The other thing in the old comp plan, I don't believe it had numbers for the rest of Reston, which are almost as high as the TSAs, not additional development, but existing development. So that the TSAs were 21,000 and the non-TSA are almost 23,000. This is today. So
yeah, fair enough.
See the complication in this. And then I went farther and started to doing the jobs for housing and try to calculate that out. I don't know that we'll end up doing all of that for this, but let's just get the chart right. And again, the chart is for all of Reston, not just the TSAs. And it's built up from the land use, not from a projection of what might have been nice in the corridor, or to give more flexibility. These are all the maximums, and you give it, I think, Commissioner Alcorn uses the haircut notion of how much do you cut it back to get, which is a little bit more real number.
John, just real quick before we go on, I think the one number in that chart was the 10,000 that might end up having to change a little bit once
Yes,
the
it will.
numbers
Yeah.
are scrubbed a little more.
Yes.
Okay.
We're in the process of working with staff too, and I think we now have tables that can work together, and you'll see some changes to this. I'm not sure where it's going to end up, but I'm hoping it's pretty much the same.
Yeah, my guess is it'll be pretty close. There'll probably be a few changes.
Yeah.
John
Great
Carter?
discussion.
Yes.
Where did the 2.3 persons per dwelling unit multiplier come from?
Well, there's in the zoning ordinance, there's a calculation of how much does a single family unit generate, how much does a multifamily unit generate.
Right.
So that comes from an average of those, which is not the best way to do it.
Yeah,
I think we would be a little bit careful of that number.
Yeah, I find that shaky. Especially after we went through with the Department of Planning and Development people, that careful study of the various multipliers that the planners use, not the zoning people, but the planners use.
Yeah.
I find that potentially very misleading.
I think you also notice that whoever picks whatever number goes in there will be perceived as shaky because it's sort of a guess.
John Mooney, is it too high or too low? 2.3.
No, I just doubt that you can average those different
different range of units.
Those ratios found in the zoning ordinance and come up with at all a reliable number.
I was just looking for a silver bullet, but
yeah, you're not going to find
that there is one.
If you calculated like village centers, convenience centers, all of those, and then added a further sophistication on single family detached, attached, and multifamily, your head's going to be spinning pretty quickly. So I just took a stab at this because everybody wanted the bottom line, and so that was my stab at the bottom line. But I recognize what you're saying. We might not have a number like that at all.
Yeah.
But I think that is a good number to have because people, talk about that kind of
Yes,
number.
they do. They
Some
do.
kind of estimate based on that.
Maybe a range.
Kind of
at least describing how we got to that number would be at least useful.
And maybe a footnote on that.
Yeah.
Might be a good idea.
Now, the commercial calculations, we didn't change those from the comp plan, except to add the numbers from the village centers, convenience centers, and other commercial areas. Those have been added to the numbers. So I think the 39 million is way too high. And we're going to get to the bottom truth of those with the staff. That's a very hard number to calculate because this goes back to 1962 and buildings built in the 60s and 70s, and to understand all the square footage of all those is hard to get and extremely tedious. Okay, probably enough for the numbers.
Great discussion. Thank you, everyone. So we have an introductory paragraph on earned density, and we would be referring folks to what we believe is a needed chapter on earned density that would follow land use. Of course, the earned density is quite formulaic, and that's just not something that is needed in the land use chapter.
Lynn?
Yes.
Yes. I was concerned when we had the earlier discussion about this in the context of housing, and I think a distinction needs to be made by different notions of earned density. Theoretically, I think even the old concept of bonus density was supposed to be earned. Whether it in fact was earned is another question, but it was supposed to be earned. what I understood Walter, and Walter, you need to explain this. I heard Walter using it in a new way, not so. Let's take one land use density category. So low density multifamily. The range there is 13 to 20 dwelling units per acre. So there's a range.
Isn't that medium?
I believe that's
Sorry.
You're right. It is medium. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So
Sorry, I've been eating and breathing this stuff for 18 months.
Good catch, Moira. Good catch. What I understood Walter to say, what he meant by earned density, was that when someone comes in with a proposal and if that developer wants to immediately claim a right to the 20, Walter is saying no. On that basic planning category, or category, you're not immediately able to claim the high number of the range. You have to
That
earn
is
it by
correct.
certain circumstances. I
That
think
is correct.
the common notion of bonus density is something that would say you can go beyond that maximum for certain additional reasons. So I think we need to distinguish those two concepts, what Walter meant by earned density and the notion of bonus density. We may want to give it a different name, and it's true that in some sense it too claims to be earned density, but there's a difference in Walter's, as I understand, and you need to say whether I'm understanding you correctly, Walter, about what you meant by earned density.
No, this is, John, I think you pointed out a planning theology issue that needs to be wrestled to the ground. So just like, some of those other things where there are a couple of different ways that this has been discussed. At a high level, I think the earned density approach makes sense, but how that squares with bonus density, I'm not sure. I don't know.
Yeah, this is also complicated, and guess what? That's what we're all about, doing creative things.
Right.
Some areas have a range and some areas don't have a range. So that's
Right.
complicated, and probably should look at the specifics of the earned density before we leap to how it's going to be applied, because
Yeah, John Carter, I totally agree. And this is also some experience that I've lived through. When we try to tie things too closely, make assumptions, I guess, that
Yeah.
don't always pan out in the real world. For example, the last time the county tried a density criteria, the assumption was that landowners will always try to get to the high end of whatever the density range is. And we went through a period of a number of years where they weren't doing that. And so they weren't basically doing things they needed to do for their development. So I think that's one of the reasons earned density, there probably would need to be a different list of criteria for earning density than perhaps the planning principles, which would be a longer, more expansive list. So, and that's one of the things that needs to be flushed out in an earned density section.
And John Mooney, just to clarify that, the bonus density associated with the provision of affordable and workforce housing is applicable by ordinance and by policy, whether you come in at the low end of the density range or you come in at the high end of the density range.
Right.
I have an application pending now outside of Tyson's where the plan calls for 12 to 16 units to the acre. We're coming in at about 14. And for every affordable dwelling unit ordinance, affordable dwelling unit that is provided, the ordinance affords the applicant bonus density to make up for the subsidies for providing the affordable units at below market prices. So the bonus density with the baseline workforce and affordable housing is not about where you come in on the density range. It's based on the fact that you're providing subsidized units. Where I would agree with you is if the maximum density range was a 2.0 FAR and you wanted to get to a 2.5 by providing extra workforce housing to offset the extra density, then in that circumstance, whether you've earned the right to go above the 2.0 maximum by providing the extra workforce housing becomes more operable. But just because you're providing workforce housing or affordable housing, you're essentially automatically entitled to the bonus density to make up for the subsidy of the units, irrespective of where you are in the density range.
Thanks for that clarification, Mark. But I think we really need to nail this down more precisely.
Yes. Yeah.
But I just want to be clear. My understanding is not that you would increase your FAR through bonus density. It's that you would move from the bottom of the range to somewhere in the middle or the top of the range, not that you add on above the maximum that's in this land use plan.
Not necessarily. If you, let's take,
She meant earn density for
earn density.
Right.
You're not increasing your FAR. You're allowed to move within the range in that category. So if you're at 13 to 20 units, then you can move from 13 to 15, from 15 to 17, from 17 to 20, but you're not increasing above the 20. That was the intention of earn density.
Correct to a point, I guess, and this is my interpretation of your plan, but like, or the way this is intended. But if you're coming in at 13 as your base density, you're allowed to have bonus units to offset the workforce or affordable housing units that would take you above 13, irrespective of whether you've earned your density to go above 13. By contrast, if you're coming in at 18, part of your justification might be that I'm providing an extra percentage of workforce housing to get to 18, or not an extra, but I'm providing extra workforce housing that I wouldn't get if I came in at the lower end of the density range associated with that. It would be one of the factors that might get you from 13 to 18. But if you build at 13, you're still entitled to the bonus units for the provision of the workforce or affordable housing. That would take you to an effective density of 14 or 15.
But you still would not go above 20 with both.
You could go above 20 if, let's say I earned my way up through the provision of whatever to the maximum at 20. You're still entitled to go above 20 to offset the subsidies for the workforce housing. It's not like, well, let me ask the question. Is the supposition that in order to get from 13 to 20, I have to forego the bonus units that pay me for the provision of the workforce or affordable housing as a way to get to 20, which in effect means that the bonus or the earned density is simply replacing the bonus density that I otherwise would have gotten by providing workforce or affordable housing.
I don't think that we're at the point where we can really have a discussion about, I mean, we haven't flushed this out yet, Mark.
Fair enough.
So
Fair enough.
I think that you are bringing some good points to the table, and you know, the group that is building out the earned density formulas and what that's going to look like. This is really going to help to frame the discussion.
Fair enough.
So thank you. Thank you.
Don't
Appreciate
forget,
it.
though, to the extent that you go above the ranges, you've got to change the numbers in the chart. And
Right.
you have to change the number of schools and the number of parks and the impact on the transportation. So be careful, but bonus.
That's where the chart came in. It really was, it's our max.
Yeah.
No matter which way you cut the pie, that chart is the max.
I don't know that that's workable.
Yeah.
John and Jennifer and the rest, I think this is a perfect example of why we need to write definition,
Yeah,
clear,
absolutely.
concise definition of what earned density is. Because if you ask the 30 people that are on this call what they think it is, you're going to get 30 different answers or 30 different variations of an answer. And I think before I think we have to have the definition. I think we have to, maybe the land use people just have to sit down and not worry about the rest of the document and come up with a reasonable definition, an explanatory definition of what earned density is.
Well, the earned density is not going to be in the land use chapter. That's its own, and it's not gone very far yet. I was just cautioning, be careful of going above the ranges, because now you've got to start changing the land use chart. But you're right, David, that this was just the introduction of the earned density. So I think Lynn's right. We should probably keep moving.
Yeah,
Understanding that you're absolutely right, David. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, David, thank you. This excellent discussion. I appreciate everybody pointing that out and probing this. It's going to have to be worked out. It is 9 o'clock, but let's do this. John Carter and Lynn, go ahead and finish up if you can, going through the chapter and the changes, and then let's wrap up for the evening.
Okay, well, that we are getting ready to enter the land use and design for the transit station areas. So we will zoom. You all have seen this before. We had a couple of edits that came in from Mr. Penniman that were accepted. So those are going to be reflected in the clean version. There was incentivized public benefits that was rejected because of the moving away from bonus to earned density, and that criteria may be a considered factor, but we just don't know yet. I have an extra page in there. This is where we have much edits to the organization. So we went back and made sure that this organization mirrored the TOD and non-TOD maps that it currently exist in the current plan. And each of the descriptions map to those. So
I would urge Bill Penniman to take a look at the wheelie, because there were areas very difficult to interpret and maybe left out in the wheelie. They're now in there. And then Mark,
yes.
in the Herndon, I think we have it, but probably take a look at it and make sure this reflects what you thought it was going to reflect. And Mark, I know you've got some issues about some of that. I think we tried to do, we tried to fix these, but it's unclear in the existing comp plan in some of these areas. At least to me, it's unclear. And so it's now written in a way that people should be looking carefully at this.
Mm-hmm. So where you see, I guess the red underline is, this is new text. So we have, now we have Wheelie Transit Station north and south, and then east and west as well.
Yeah, these are the areas, Bill, to focus on. These were not included
Yes.
in the last plan in every aspect. It was hard to figure out these.
Yeah, and we want to make sure that, you know, we're creating very clear language, so that we don't end up with you know, a defect in the plan language that we've seen happen. Again, this is we're moving from mixed use, which is at 50-50, to the residential mixed use, which is a 75-25 with an each. So that's just kind of how the organization is flowing. We've added Isaac Newton Square. And to John Mooney's, or I'm sorry, Jose's comparison, some of the areas that are built out, we just felt that it was not necessary to focus a lot on those areas. If it's already completed and built out to its maximum, there are some areas, well, especially in the neighborhoods that we said not needed. Then we move in.
Thought was
Sorry?
unclear. The area unclear. It would be west of Comstock over to Plaza America. That's the first red that you see. That applies to that area.
Yeah.
And then the area east of Isaac Newton Square across Wheelie, it was not clear to me what the plan was proposing. So now the plan proposes something, but you might have a different perspective of what it should be. I think we have it right.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. So we're going into Wheelie South. Wheelie, this is TOD South. This descriptive text here for the area that includes Vernado, Comstock, Campus Commons is in process. But each of those, so this would be east and west of Wheelie Avenue. So these are sub-districts within the TOD.
So Roland Clark Place is probably in here. Yeah, there's Association Drive.
And Roland
It's not
Clark.
as clear it could be. And then Roland Clark, Mark, you might want to look at that and see if we've captured.
Yeah.
Okay. By the way, are you guys going to circulate this afterwards? Because I think the last one I saw didn't have some of these edits in there.
It should have.
It should have been circulated. You're right. The one before this
is-
didn't have them in
So
it. This new one
Yeah.
does.
But the one that I sent this out yesterday to the listserv.
Okay.
Red line and clean.
Yeah, I've got the clean version and then the red line version, and it doesn't, some of these comments, I guess the comments weren't in there. Maybe that's what I'm missing.
Yeah, because I didn't see this whole thing.
They are.
I'll just send out this PDF.
Oh,
I'll
thank
send
you.
out this PDF. All right. So then we move into the non-TOD for Wheelie Station, and we have included Plaza America as a sub-district and Fannie Mae. And again, we are working on this new descriptive text for these areas. In the previous versions, you will notice that we mistakenly referred to this as Wheelie East non-TOD district, when in fact it is correctly labeled Reston East on the map. So we made that correction. Michael Faraday Court, Lake Fairfax Business Center are all included in that area. Excuse me, as well as the eastern section between the TOD and the proposed extension of South Lakes Drive. Reston East subdistrict. Then we get into the Reston Town Center TSA. So we just need some overarching text to describe this north of the Dulles Toll Road district. But we get into the subdistricts. This is Town Center North, And this is TOD. This is some new verbiage that Mr. Penniman helped us to kind of flush out in terms of the percentage of residential and non-residential must remain as required in the TOD. Individual developments may have the flexibility of adjusting the percentage of residential and non-residential as long as applications are submitted concurrently, thereby maintaining the required percentage for that area. Support retail uses will be in office, hotel, or residential buildings, complementary to other uses. So you'll see that that language is kind of repeated throughout. Again, that language is appearing here in the Transit Station South Mixed Use Subdistrict. And again, this is TOD, which is, and mixed use, which is 50-50. And here we get to the residential. We added the Reston Heights District language that was moved to the town center area.
See, that was missing in the last plan. It was combined with Roland Clark, so they're separate.
Now we're pointing out that if you compare the maps within the current plan, that this 75-25, that it's TOD versus non-TOD. So we just think that that needs to be reconciled. Then we get into Reston Town Center non-TOD. We just need a 1-paragraph descriptive text for that. And then we get into the Town Center Urban Core non-TOD. Okay, yep. So Bruce Ramo recommended adding while maintaining areas of mature trees, and the workforce felt that that was a very good addition. Thank you, Bruce, if you're on the call. And again, this is where, so the Town Center North TOD district is one of the areas that we received edits from staff and ANOVA. Concluding our meeting, I guess was right before we adjourned, the request was made that the workforce take the language that was provided by staff and insert that over the language that was created by the work group. And we did have a rigorous discussion about that. And the work group felt that it was important that we maintain the language that we came up with for this area, and recognizing that this plan is going to go to staff eventually, and they will have an opportunity to edit this language. But we felt very strongly that this language was the correct way to go. I think this was an addition that came from, I believe, Mr. Penniman, the additional residential, particularly for WDUs and ADUs, may be built or combined with other construction, so long as it does not detract from the elements above. Thank you, Bill. We had a discrepancy regarding the number of units. Oh, this was, I believe, another addition. Except as provided above, for the civic use areas, all residential density will be assigned to ANOVA-owned blocks 2, 4, and 6, except for the Emory Rucker transitional housing and affordable housing units. But we did have a couple of areas that we need to make sure that the interpretations are aligned. This is new language that the existing library and homeless shelter will continue to operate until such time as replacement facilities are made available. The library is seen as a one-to-one, and the shelter may locate to a transitional location so that those services are continuing to be provided, but it may not be in the exact same location. Whereas the library, we feel that it needs to continue to operate until such time that the new library is open. Okay, Town Center West District non-TOD. This is mixed use. Okay, this was Bill Penniman. So here we have a comment regarding this use of development intensities, given the proximity for the metro. There was a discussion that this should be mixed use, and we just pointed out that it is mixed use in the header here. Let's see. We have some areas where we still need FAR to be verified with staff. Okay, so that does it for the Reston Town Center. So here we're moving into Herndon Monroe. And the working group would really like to thank Mark Malcolm for his edits and eyes on this section. Again, we're getting into the TOD mixed use, which is the 50-50. Not a whole lot of edits there. And then residential 75-25. Then we're getting into non-TOD. This is where we need some opening descriptive text. Then we have the Woodland Park Great Oak District, non-TOD. And within that, there's the north of Sunrise Valley sub-district. Not a whole lot of edits there. And then south. And then we get into the design and placemaking in the Reston TSAs. So this would apply to all. Again, we've got the discussion about parking, and Mark Looney, thank you for your comments. But again, we're saying below grade parking is preferred where appropriate, and above grade parking must be screened. There's no discussion of attached or detached. We had this, I believe, was healthy living. These were all edits, I believe, that Mr. Penniman made, and the work group liked this additional bullet so much that we actually added healthy living to it. And then bird-friendly vegetation, we added playgrounds. So your edits really do get the working group thinking about, you know, what your intent is, and in some cases we're able to even make it better. So we're piggybacking on your edits. This is all. Okay, this was another Mr. Penniman edit. We loved it. Thank you. And again, we had some edits that were rejected, as mentioned at the beginning of the review. At least half of any such structure must be below ground. That was rejected, and these should be minimized was also rejected. And I'm sure we'll be coming back and reviewing them again. Okay, we're into village centers, and it's 17 minutes. Okay, we got through the TSAs pretty quickly. Okay, Moira, I think that this language may tackle the request that you had. So this reads an amendment to the original zoning plus a final development plan. Extensive community engagement and public hearings are required for redevelopment of a village center. These are some new ads that came from the working group during our last meeting. And those centers. Okay, Hunter's Woods. Okay, I don't think we have a whole lot of changes to the village centers from our last meeting, so I'm just gonna kind of zoom through these. Okay, Chris Daniel, thank you for alerting us to the fact that the guidelines are about to be reviewed and updated. So we just removed, so I think we had a year, it was in 1992 that was in there. So we felt that by removing the year, that the updates will automatically be included. So thank you for that edit.
Thanks, Lynn. I just want to add to task force members that when that does occur, there will be a public involvement component. So residents of Reston and interest will have a chance to provide input on it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Okay. Okay, this is all Lake Anne. Okay, convenience centers, not a whole lot of changes there. Now, we had some discussion, I think here, John Mooney, I believe you had mentioned something about Laurel Way. Oh, no, it was Jose.
Yeah.
Since, and I think that our thinking, this was one of the areas that we said, well, you know, that area is completely built out and it's, you know, so we felt that it wasn't really applicable. But I mean, we can certainly add it back in.
Well, it's not in Reston. It's not in Reston and it's built out, so we took it out. For better or worse. There's a portion of it is that number 10.
Right. So here we're getting into Reston neighborhoods. And this again is the map that Bill Mayland pointed out to us that we had neglected to include or refer to. So this is a map that we feel that needs to be updated, and we can certainly do that. But you'll notice as we go through the Reston neighborhoods that there are a lot of changes to this particular section. We went through and we deleted the previous number 1, which was the Hawthorne and Vintage Place clusters, since they are completely built out. And the same thing with, so Vintage and Hawthorne, same thing with the amendment to the comprehensive plan in 2007. So this was the church on Colts Neck Road. Again, this had a lot of content that it's already done. So we just felt that that could be deleted. Now this area, this is the Lake Fairfax Drive that is planned for, now we recognize that the zoning is private recreation use, but we just felt that private could be removed and that it is planned for recreation use. And I think we did the same thing for the golf courses, that they're planned for private recreation use. So that was just a discussion that we had amongst ourselves and thought that that private was not really necessary for the land use chapter.
This is an example of how things have happened since the last plan that are no longer applicable to the new one. That's
right.
And I jump in here. This is the Hunt Club, and it's A, not in Reston proper, but B, can I ask staff to please email Lynn? Has there been an approved plan for the back of the Hunt Club property? I thought there was. Nothing has been built, and So can you please, can the staff please help us with this? Is there an approved plan for the back of that property? Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy.
This is Mike
Yes.
Jones. Just mentioned on the golf courses, although that one is private and one is public. So it's kind of misleading to say that to leave it out in the one case.
Well, they're both listed as private recreation use and they are both privately owned.
Good.
Then maybe private should stay in.
Just says recreation use. Doesn't say whether it's public or private.
I thought Lynn said private was deleted.
Right.
The current language says private.
Yeah, so that's deleted. The new language is just recreation, no public or private.
Right.
So it's good.
I'm just suggesting or countering
Thank
that
you.
it should be left in.
Doesn't have to be private.
So we deleted private from the Fairfax Hunt Club as well. So I think if we put private back in, then it goes back in all of the areas that it was originally used. The working group thought that it was not an important distinction, but we can certainly discuss it again.
Probably
Thank
not
you, Mike.
important for land use, but maybe important for other reasons, but keep going.
It's not important.
Thank you. So you'll see that now with those deletions that we have Reston, the golf courses become number 1, number 2 becomes Lake Fairfax Drive, and we need to find out from staff if there's been approval. Number 3 is the area adjacent to the western edge of Lake Fairfax Park on Colvin Run. And it has been developed as multifamily residential use. The area north of Lawyers Road, this is where St. John Newman Catholic Church sits. Charter Oak Apartments should be highlighted in the neighborhoods map. And there is an area we said the density of 50 DUs per acre must only be permitted if the applicant can demonstrate a previous approval. And then finally, Deepwood townhouse development. So we would now have 6 locations on that neighborhood map. And then we've changed the wording here. Instead of having guidelines for single family redevelopment, we've just changed that to recommendations for single family, attached and detached. So this is added language here that I would encourage you all to review the latest red line and clean copies of and I will send this PDF file out to you all. And then we also have recommendations for multifamily, and that is it.
All right.
Before 9:30, Supervisor Alcorn.
Thank you, Lynn. All righty. So let's hold off on Q&A. Let's start next week's meeting with Q&A on this document, and we'll just work either from the PDF version or, maybe on the screen here, Lynn. So hold your questions, bring your thoughts, bring your questions to the next meeting. We'll also need to do planning principles the next meeting. We didn't get to that tonight. So Tammy, thank you for your patience on that. And I believe there were just
a
few
favor
other
on planning principles.
Yeah, sure, Tammy, go ahead.
They're short. I mean, it's not a voluminous document. You have it. Please, everybody read it. If we have a week, please, if you have problems, send me things now. We need to be moving along on each meeting and making progress. So hopefully we can vote on this if I get edits, and our conversation next week is very limited. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. Good advice. We also have a couple of other items that were requested information-wise. First of all, Jose is going to post, if he hasn't already, his crosswalk of the earlier land use chapter and the existing comprehensive plan. So that's going to be posted, and there'll be, Jose, I guess, a link sent around. Is that right? Lynn, yes.
I was just going to suggest, if I may,
Sure.
Jose, could I just send you the PDF and then you can send it out with your, so we've got one email with both documents?
Perfect.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right, excellent idea. We also had a request earlier this evening. Let's see. Okay, so we did see a couple of folks that asked for staff comments or suggestions in ANOVAs on Town Center North. So, Jose, let's see if that can be distributed before next week for comments.
Yeah, I think it's basically, I think it's probably basically what's in the current plan, but I will send that to you, Jose, and you can send that to everybody with everything.
Okay.
And then there was one other thing, and I've lost it. Jose, what was the last thing that somebody, oh, I know, David Vanell was asking for people to email him with comments and suggestions on the housing chapter and related issues there. So I think that's all. Jose, did I forget anything or anybody else?
Did great.
Thank you. All right. We did go over, thank you everybody for working through all this. I think Jose's got a little better track record than I in moving the meetings forward faster, but he and I maybe will talk about that for next week. But some very good discussion tonight. Appreciate it. And let's keep going. In the meantime, Tammy, your hands up. Let's see.
Yes, please. So we're gonna continue land use. We're
Yep.
gonna go to the principles.
Yes.
Do you want another focus of conversation if we're not ready for the completion of housing?
Yeah, there may be one other chapter or two, Jose. I believe we were talking about that earlier today that might be ready. Is it Heritage Resources might be ready?
I think
Thought we
Heritage
were done
Resources
with
already
Heritage.
got approval. Chris?
Could I bring up a point?
Yes, Gary.
And John Mooney's going to shoot me. But we should at least talk a little bit about what we got from the county on transportation next week, John. Maybe not go through everything, but at least mention it.
That's actually, John Mooney, are you okay with that as at least a topic for discussion?
Sorry for sandbagging you, John.
So in principle, yes, I told Jose that I hoped we would be ready to present something on November 1st. Here's the thing, I don't want to waste people's time. So we have two sources of information. We have to complete our issues decision list that you may recall. And we don't have a lot of things left on that, but we need to do that. And we now have some draft comments of Fairfax County DOT on those decision lists. Thirdly, they have some other comments on the text.
Yep.
What I would like to do is not bring those at 3 different times to the task force, but at one time, so we can go through it and be done with it and then do the final draft. I think
John's right. I'm sorry for getting in there, John. Because probably going through that in the manner you just discussed is a better way, but it occurred to me we could at least say something about our meeting next week.
Yeah. Well, in a way, I said we did it. And I think Bill Penniman and Gary and I were really very impressed by how hard Fairfax County DOT staff worked on their comments. They were really thoughtful comments. So, but the point is, I think we may have them all 3 of those components to bring to you. I would hate to go through it. Drive you guys crazy to do it.
John, let's check in later this week on that.
Okay.
Let's check back. Tammy.
Yes. Okay. Am I crazy, or didn't we pass on, we voted on heritage resources, did we not?
Heritage resources done.
Yeah,
Did we,
I
did
thought.
we get
Yeah,
that?
that
out?
was September. That was
Yeah.
September.
Yes.
Jose,
Okay.
which one do we have that might be
So
coming
can
up?
I suggest that Commerce go?
Commerce
And-
already went, right, Gary?
No, Commerce went. That's
Yeah.
fine.
Did it-
Tammy.
Is that approved? I
Yes,
can check that
Yeah.
off my list?
yes.
Okay, great.
You even had it off your list last time.
All righty.
All right. Well, listen, we got 2 things for next week, maybe a third. And if I remember what that 4th one was, perhaps we'll put it on. But anyway, we'll get it out there to everybody. Listen, thank you. I know we ran over. Appreciate everybody working as hard as you are and engaging on this. So let's call it an evening for tonight and then regroup next week. So thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Walter.
Thanks, everyone.